Thank you, Brother Tommy. All right, continuing our study of this enigmatic book of Revelation. You see on the board, last time I wrote the assignment, we were going to try to get through chapter 2 and 3. Warren changed today, but he didn't change the chapters because we're still working our way through them.
I figured that.
That's okay. That's okay. All right. I hope you spend a little time this week looking over chapters 2 and 3, and particularly the instructions and the admonitions that were given to these 7 churches. And as I was reviewing and studying this week, one of the things that I thought was significant is the fact that John begins his exhortation, if you will, his exposition, if you will, with the churches. You know, why does he start with the churches? Why didn't he deal with something else? Well, the fact that he deals with the churches, I think, tells us something very important. As we studied last time, his letters are directed to 7 specific churches that existed at the time. They were churches that were Christian churches in that era, the 1st and or 2nd century A.D. But we also know that this letter was intended to be instructional to all churches of all time, because I think what we see in this writing is an exposition of certain characteristics of these churches that we see in all churches. I think if you look at today at any church that claims to be a Christian church, you may find something in John's letter that applies to that church, maybe several things. But by way of review, what we have here are letters to 7 churches, and the 7 churches represent, they start off, I think, representing periods of history, certain changes that the church went through at different periods of time. And it is said by many scholars that the church at Ephesus was representative of the apostolic church that existed in roughly 100 A.D. The church at Smyrna was representative of the martyr church that existed between roughly 300 and 500 A.D. The church at Pergamum was representative of the so-called state church that came into existence when Emperor Constantine of Rome first legalized Christianity. The church at Thyatira was representative of the papal church, and that is the church that came into existence and was particularly corrupt in around 1500 AD, late 1400s, early 1500s. We'll talk some more about that today. The church of Sardis is said to be representative of the Reformation church that came about at the time of Martin Luther, roughly early 1500s. The church at Philadelphia, representative of the missionary church that had its beginning around the 1800s. And then finally, the church at Laodicea is representative of the apostate church, which has existed, I suspect, from the very beginning, but is certainly in existence right now. I think if we look at many of the churches that exist today, bodies that call themselves churches, I'm afraid that they fall into the category of the apostate church. And the message to the Laodicean church applies specifically to them. So again, I think it's very significant that John begins his discourse with these letters to the churches. And as we saw in chapter 1, verse 19, Jesus himself appears to John and he gives him this instruction. He says, "Write therefore the things which you have seen," that is, which are going to be shown to you, the things which are, and the things that will take place after these things. And then Jesus goes on to say, he reveals to him the mystery of the 7 lampstands, and he reveals to him the mystery or the meaning of the 7 stars. And what is the meaning of the 7 lampstands? Who are they? Churches. The churches, okay. And who are the stars? The stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and the word angel there is really messenger. And so when the letter is addressed to the angel of the 7 churches, it really is the messenger of the 7 churches, and therefore it could apply to the pastor or the one who delivers the message from the 7 churches. And that really personalizes it. One of the things that I hope you have done in your study of these 7 churches is to think about the matrix that we drew the last time, because as we noted, each one of these letters to the 7 churches has several different characteristics to it. In that, for example, you have the 7 churches listed here, but in each one of these letters, we have a description, if you will, of the sender of the letter. And we know the sender of the letter is Jesus Christ himself, but it's interesting that in each one of these letters, he picks out a particular characteristic of himself. For example, he says, when he writes to Ephesus, he says, the one who holds the 7 stars in his right hand and the one who walks among the 7 golden lampstands. That's a powerful message, because Jesus there is saying that I am the one who holds the 7 stars or the 7 angels or the 7 pastors in my hand. I hold the pastors of my churches in my hand, number one. And number two, he says, I actually am walking among these various churches. I personally am doing that. So he identifies himself. And then he begins the letter by saying, I know. Sometimes he says, I know your deeds. But when he says, I know, he says, I want you to understand that there's not anything about you or what you're doing that you can hide from me. I know your deeds. I know who you are. I know your heart. So don't think that you pulled anything over on me. And then in most of the letters, he says something positive about the church. He says something negative about the church. And then he says, he concludes by saying, he who has an ear, let him hear. And we talked last time about the significance of that ear command, and we'll talk about that some more today. And then there's also a promise. He says, to the one who overcomes. And so I think it's important for us to emphasize what it is that is to be overcome, the problem in the church that's to be overcome. Now, one of the things we discussed last time also is that it appears, if you look at a couple of these, look through these letters, there are a couple of these churches as to which the criticism seems to be negative. And the criticism seems to be minor. That is, there's not as much criticism as there is commendation. And one of the churches about which very little negative is said is the church at Smyrna and also the church at Philadelphia. Did you notice that as you read? The others, there's some of these other churches that the criticism is pretty harsh. And we'll talk about that a little bit too. But you know, last time we talked about the admonition that's given in each one of these letters. If you look in chapter 2, verse 7, Jesus says, he who has an ear, let him hear. And we talked about the significance of the ear. And as I was studying this week, I thought about other places in the scriptures where there are references to an ear. Last time we talked about that very strange passage that is found in Exodus chapter 21, verses 5 and 6. Does anybody remember the substance of that?
Yeah, a slave who chose to stay with his master.
Yeah.
They pierced his ear.
Yeah. Not only did they pierce his ear, and yeah, Linda's exactly right. There's the Levitical laws allowed slavery, but there was also a time of release, the Shemitah year. After 7 years, slaves had to be released. But the slave who loved his master and didn't want to leave his master had the right to go to his master and say, I love you, I don't want to leave you. And then the ritual they went through, if the slave did that, was the master took an awl or an ice pick and they walked over to the door and they stuck a hole through his ear and into either the door or the door frame. And that was to symbolize what? That the slave chose to forever stay with that master. Now, you say that's a strange custom. I think it's no coincidence that Jesus says here, he who has an ear, let him hear. Because if you will, I think that the only ear that counts to God is the pierced ear, if you will. You understand what I'm saying by that? That those of us who don't have pierced ears are not really proper slaves or proper servants to the master. You know, as I thought about that, I also thought about a strange account that all of us here remember. We studied in Sunday school. Remember when Jesus was in the garden the night of his arrest, and the mob came to arrest him. He's there with his disciples. And what does old Peter do? He pulls out his sword, and what does he do?
Cuts off the ear.
He cuts off the right ear, I think the Gospel of Luke says, of the servant of the high priest. And you think, cut off his ear, you know? A guy wielding a sword in the crowd like that, I can understand somebody getting his hand cut off, or his head cut off, or his leg cut off, but to cut off somebody's ear, you know, how difficult is that? And I think that we have that message. I think it's actually true, but it's also very symbolic. And it's symbolic of one of the things that Christians who get too fervent do. You know, old Peter, what was Peter trying? Was Peter trying to do something good or evil? He was trying to do something good. He was trying to protect Jesus, right? And he was trying to do it in the way that he thought was right. But in the process of it, he winds up cutting off this guy's ear. What does Jesus do? He bends down and picks up the ear. You know, I suspect he looks at Peter and says, you know, how many times did I tell you, Peter, whoever has an ear, you know, who has an ear, let him hear. So he's saying, Peter, you have been so fervent in what you're doing that you cut off this guy's ear. That is, you have cut off his ability to truly understand my message. And I think that's a lesson to Christians of all time. Sometimes we get so fervent in what we do. We may have good intentions, but we cut off the ears of others. Have you ever done that before? I think we all do. And we've all known other Christians who have set about to cut off our own ears by the way they have addressed us. So we need to be careful of that. So, but Jesus is saying, he who has an ear, let him hear. And so I think he wants us to have pierced ears. He wants our ears to be pierced to his door. Jesus himself, one of the I ams he said is that I am the door, right? And so he wants to have our ears pierced and stuck to his door, which is him, right? And then you started to say something.
I want to get with Tom, see when he wants to go get his ears pierced. Get an earring, huh?
It's got to be a special door, though.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Only one door. That's right.
Kind of sounds like branding cattle.
A little bit. We could make a metaphor out of that too. Okay. All right. So we left off last time. We talked about what was the main criticism of the church at Ephesus. Anybody remember?
They wasn't being faithful to God. They were taking and taking things in their favor.
Yeah, that's right.
They were not following. Just like today's time, we at churches we're taking and well, let's just take for instance the Lord's Supper. We used to have the Lord's Supper once a month. Now then, we may have the Lord's Supper only 4 times a year. Now, that's the thing that we're getting away from. Mm-hmm. Why are we getting away from it? Is it because of the effort to do it? Or what? I don't know.
Good point. Good point.
Well, one similar to that is go now and try to find a church, a Baptist church, that has Sunday night and Wednesday night services.
Yeah.
Yeah. They don't have any.
That's right.
Sunday night's almost gone. Wednesday nights quickly fading. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, it's little things, but they.
In chapter 2, verse 4, it says,
But it all adds up, you know, one thing after another, and you keep going and you keep going, pretty soon people just come accustomed to it, and that's it.
But I kind of like
Now
this.
we need to bring it back, but you can't say, you know, that this church is going to redeem everybody, but we can't redeem ourselves.
Yeah, you know, I kind of think we really ought to go the way, though, we ought to have an option, though, have churches on Sundays or Saturdays, and you know, then you choose which one you want to go to, depending on your schedule. I do think that will make sense.
or Monday or Tuesday or Thursday or Friday, whatever your schedule is. Yeah. But the way Jesus put it in chapter 2, verse 4, he says, "This I have against you, that you have left your first love."
Yeah.
That you have left your first love. And what did he mean by that? What first love did that church leave, and what first love are other churches that you see leaving, or have they left? What do you think he's referring to when he says you've left your first love?
Love for him.
Yeah, your love for
Not putting him first.
That's right, not putting him first, as you say. You know, Jesus told us who he was. Jesus says, "I'm the bread of life. I'm the light of the world. I'm the door. I'm the good shepherd. I'm the resurrection and the life. I am the way and the truth and the life. I am the true vine." And he wants everybody to live by those precepts and feel those precepts every day. And he wants everybody to go back to the time that you can remember, that you realize that but for his grace, you'd have been cast into the burning fires of hell. And you sort of feel like, whew, wow, I'm saved. And you have that love for him. That should be foundational. Now, all these other things that churches do, all the programs, all the policies, all the buildings they have, you know, those should be secondary, but unfortunately they have become primary. Jackie and I were at a church just yesterday, I guess it was.
No.
I lost track of time. Was it Friday? It was Friday afternoon. One of these mega churches over in Houston. I'm not going to give the name of it, but I walked, I drove by and I was blown away. I mean, it looked like a university campus. I mean, the campus of this church was larger than Baton Rouge Community College by probably a couple of fold. We walked into one of the buildings, and man, we were weaving through. I never knew where I was. I mean, it was huge. The sanctuary was, it was huge. They had aquariums. I bet the cost and maintenance of their aquariums was larger than the entire budget of Indian Mound Baptist Church. I mean, they had facilities, and I thought to myself, what is it that made this? Is it truly a work of God? And if it is, wow, that's magnificent. But if it's something else, watch out. You know, and when you have that many things to take care of, I wonder if sometimes you would have a tendency to lose track or lose focus on what is really the most important thing. And you don't have to be huge to be distracted. I don't know how big the church of Ephesus was, but no matter how big or how small you are, what Jesus is telling us here, don't stray from your first love. Remember what is foundational, and never spend so much time on programs or buildings or policies or whatever it is that you get distracted from your first love, what the church is really about.
Well, they were ready for Jesus to come back.
They were.
You know, and that to me, when you people building these big places and all, they must not expect them to come back too soon. They wouldn't be wasting their money on buildings. They would be trying to win.
Yeah, and look, and again, I'm not condemning or criticizing any church, but you know, it seems like to me you create for yourselves an awful lot of distractions when you grow that large and you have that many things, that many other things that need to be taken care of. You know, I thought about it as I was walking through. You know, who shampoos the carpets in this place? You know, who makes sure that all the doors are locked? Who makes sure that all the doors are unlocked? Like I said, who cleans all these? They have these beautiful aquariums. Some of them seem to be almost half the size of this room here.
But another thing, to turn that around another way too, I hate to see a church being built like a barn.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that. I think that you should, the church is should be pretty. I do think of that there, and I like to look at beautiful churches and everything. But I sure don't like to look at one that looks like a barn that's been put up out there, metal and everything like that there, and they got one little cross sitting up on it. And if it didn't have the cross on it, you wouldn't know it was a church. Because that goes both ways.
It does. But we should never confuse the church with the building in which it meets.
It could be anything. I mean,
that's right.
Look how Jesus, where he was born.
He was born in a barn.
That's right. And there's merit to what Tommy says. We should be respectful. The house of God, we should have respect for it. But again, don't confuse the church, which is the people, with the building within which it meets. Right? And we sometimes do that.
On a personal note, what brought you and Jackie all the way out here from South Baton Rouge?
That's a good question. That's a good question. We passed 13 really nice churches on the way out here.
We live right across the street on the diagonal from Greenville Springs Baptist. We had a big meeting for Michaela Thursday, Magellan, slipped a new thing for her, and they said, who is your support group if you need anything financially or support for you? And I thought about it, actually that's us. But